What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So, we have some unfortunate, interesting news. As undefeated 3-division world champion, former junior welterweight undisputed world champion, currently the WBO reigning welterweight world champion, who is widely considered by many to be the #1 pound-for-pound best fighter in the world, Terence "Bud" Crawford, 38 wins, no losses, no draws, 29 big wins by way of knockout, 34 years of age, 5'8" with a 74-inch arm reach. He most recently took on and had his biggest victory against two-time welterweight world champion superstar boxer Showtime Shawn Porter, who is now retired and for sure going to be in the Hall of Fame. With that said, that was Terence Crawford's biggest victory. The world wants to see Terence Crawford in the biggest fight in boxing against his biggest rival, and undefeated unified WBC, IBF, welterweight world champion, superstar boxer, Errol Spence Jr., who is widely considered by many to be top 3 best pound-for-pound fighters in the world, with a resume of 27 wins, no losses, no draws, 21 wins by way of knockout, 31 years of age, 5'9.5" with a 72-inch arm reach. With that said, Terence Crawford, it seemed to be a big holdup because Terence Crawford was with legendary promoter, top-ranked CEO and promoter Bob Arum and ESPN. But now Terence Crawford is a network promotional free agent, and Terence Crawford, it seems like this fight with Errol Spence has got more important to Terence Crawford. Over the past few months, or dating back a year or so, Terence Crawford started to say the Errol Spence fight is not important. Now, this is considered and viewed as the biggest fight in boxing, and Terence Crawford is saying that this fight, at one point in time, he was saying the fight wasn't important because Errol Spence matched the pay-per-views, and Errol Spence, he stated that he feels like he should get the biggest share of the pie at 60-40% because Errol Spence, he stated, the proof is in the pudding, the proof is in the numbers don't lie. I do bigger pay-per-view numbers than Terence Crawford. And Terence Crawford is entering my division. I'm not entering his. Well, that is true when you match the pay-per-view numbers up together. Errol Spence, first pay-per-view against Mikey Garcia. Mikey Garcia, 4-division world champion, Mexican superstar boxer. It did 350,000 pay-per-views. Terence Crawford, first pay-per-view in unification bout against Victor Postol, who was seen as one of the best fighters in the world, Victor Postol. It did 60,000 pay-per-views. Errol Spence's second pay-per-view showdown was against very same own two-time welterweight champion Showtime Shawn Porter. It did 325,000 pay-per-views. Terence Crawford's second pay-per-view was against Amir King Kong, multi-division world champion, United Kingdom superstar boxer, and it did 150,000 pay-per-view buys. And Amir Khan got the biggest split, the biggest share of the pie, okay? Terence Crawford reportedly received $3.5 to $4 million for the fight with Amir Khan. Amir Khan got $7.2 million for the Terence Crawford fight. This is on record. This is Bob Arum, the promoter of Terence Crawford, who promoted the fight between Amir Khan and Terence Crawford, who told me personally that Amir Khan negotiated his way to $7 million, and Terence Crawford got $3 to $5 million on the back end of pay-per-views. So Amir Khan, who had already been previously knocked out multiple times, wasn't very relevant. He got a bigger share of the pie against Terence Crawford. It did 150,000 pay-per-views. Terence Crawford's third pay-per-view event was against the very same Showtime Shawn Porter. Now, what's interesting to note here is Errol Spence had his third pay-per-view against 2-division world champion Puerto Rican superstar boxer Danny Swift Garcia, did 315,000 pay-per-views. With that said, Terence Crawford, he stated that the reason Shawn Porter and Errol Spence fight was so successful and did such big numbers is because largely in due part to Shawn Porter's star power. Okay? It did 325,000 pay-per-view buys in a neutral site in Los Angeles, California, at the Staples Center, which was completely sold out. So it wasn't in Errol Spence's backyard. It wasn't in Shawn Porter's backyard. It was in a neutral site. And it did 325,000 pay-per-view buys, in which, like I stated, Terence Crawford, he stated that it was due largely in part because of Shawn Porter's status. Now, we know that Shawn Porter and Terence Crawford are good friends. But now Shawn Porter fights Terence Crawford, and it does reportedly anywhere between 100 130 to 190,000 pay-per-view buys. It topped out at 190,000 pay-per-view buys, in which that means it did 135,000 less pay-per-view buys than Terence Crawford, than Errol Spence and Sean Porter. So that means that the common denominator here is Errol Spence. So Terence Crawford, he admitted that the pay-per-view suffered, but then he pointed to the reason the pay-per-view suffered was due to the fact that the fight was on ESPN Plus on a streaming app, opposed to be on a regular pay-per-view. Another important thing to note here is that Terence Crawford's first two fights were on regular pay-per-view format, TV format, not on the streaming app, and he did more pay-per-views on the streaming app at 190 than he did against Amir Khan on the biggest sporting platform in the world, ESPN, on regular pay-per-view format. He did 150,000 pay-per-views. He did more pay-per-views than his format against Victor Postal, which was on HBO, I believe, and he did 60,000 pay-per-views. So he did his biggest numbers on the streaming app. So he stated that it suffered because it was on the streaming app. Okay, so he did it on the streaming app and off the streaming app. But on the streaming app, he did more numbers, bigger numbers than he did off the streaming app. And so Errol Spence's reasoning for saying he deserves a bigger share of the pie is simply because Errol Spence is stating that my numbers, the proof are in the pudding, the numbers don't lie, and I'm doing bigger numbers. I'm just a bigger draw. Terence Crawford, he sells out arenas in Omaha, Nebraska. The MGM Grand Garden Arena was sold out against Sean Porter. But Errol Spence sold out the Staples Center. It holds nearly twice as much people as the MGM holds, about 17,000 people. The Staples Center holds about 40,000 people. Okay, he sold out the Staples Center against Sean Porter. Errol Spencer sold out Dallas Cowboys Stadium, who holds 100,000 people in the stadium, and he sold out Dallas Cowboys Stadium twice. Now that's his backyard, and Terence Crawford's backyard doesn't hold a stadium that could hold that capacity outside of Nebraska's Cornhuskers college football team. But he's still doing the bigger numbers, regardless, and he's doing the bigger purses. And so with that said, this has been a sticking point that's preventing the fight from happening. Now, let me add this. Terence Crawford is now a network free agent, promotional free agent. And Terence Crawford, he has the ability to negotiate this situation. But Terence Crawford, he takes to social media and he states that nothing has changed. He's not taking a 60-40 split. And he added Errol Spence. He says that's not happening. Okay? Now, what's important here to note is that Errol Spence initially stated that I deserve the biggest share of the pie because the proof is in the pudding. But then he also stated, but I'll let Al Heyman, my advisor, negotiate the fight. So that's not to say that Errol Spence won't take a 55-45 split, okay? But something here else is important to note, that Errol Spence is not standing on 60-40 or no fight. But he does want a bigger share of the pie. And I'm sure Al Heyman understands and identifies his worth and is going to attempt to negotiate a bigger share. Where Terence Crawford said it has to be 60-40 in his favor, which is not realistic, or it has to be 50-50, which is also not realistic when you look at the numbers. Now, we know history has told us that the A side and the B side. There's an A side and there's a B side, okay? In this situation, Errol Spence is clearly the A side. We know Floyd Mayweather took a 70-30 split when it came to Oscar De La Hoya fight. And he was already a pay-per-view star, not as big as Oscar De La Hoya. He was already considered the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world, similar to this situation. But Oscar De La Hoya had already been knocked out and took multiple losses. Floyd Mayweather is still undefeated. Obviously, he retired undefeated. He took a 70-30 split. Not only did he take a 70-30 split in favor of Oscar De La Hoya, but he also fought at a weight class. Oscar De La Hoya chose the weight class at 154, a weight he never fought at. Oscar De La Hoya also made Floyd Mayweather wear 10-ounce heavyweight gloves, which is something he's never done. And Oscar De La Hoya also chose the ring side. But Floyd Mayweather understood, once I beat Oscar De La Hoya, I become the cash cow. So it doesn't matter, okay? And so he just bet on himself and believed in himself. So we know there's history of this, right? But when you look at this situation, Terence Crawford is not willing to do so. But what Terence Crawford needs to understand is that there's other ways to make up for the 10%, okay? See, the ego of Terence Crawford publicly not wanting to say that he feels that his value is as equal as the Errol Spence is what's holding this up. See, Terence Crawford publicly doesn't want to say that he took a lesser split to fight Errol Spence, because publicly his ego is telling him and his fan base that he deserved the same as Errol Spence. So he's misunderstanding and misjudging the business part about this, because Terence Crawford can make up for the 10% off the books. Terence Crawford can make up for the 10% via sales, pay-per-view sales. He's going to make up for the 10% via concession stands percentage, gate, things of that nature. He's going to make up for the 10%. You understand? So let's say it's 55-45. The 10%, you're saying that Errol Spence proof his hard work is not worth 10% more when the numbers tell the true story. But Terence Crawford is misjudging the fact that he can make up for the 10% financially on the back end very easily. It's not that he wants to make up for the money. It's his ego in the public eye. He doesn't want to be seen less than Errol Spence Jr. Has nothing to do with the money. It has to do with the perception of himself and Errol Spence Jr. It's his ego. It has nothing to do with the money. It has nothing to do with the percentage. Clearly, right? We saw, like I said, he took a less split against Amir Khan. He was willing to take an 80-20 split against Manny Pacquiao to make that fight happen. 80-20 split to fight Manny Pacquiao. Okay? Bob Arum told the world that the investment group in Abu Dhabi was willing to put up $50 million. And $40 million was going to go to Manny Pacquiao and $10 million would go to Terence Crawford. That's an 80-20 split. And he didn't mind taking it, according to Bob Arum. He didn't mind accepting that split. So why is he not willing to accept the split with Errol Spence? Because it's court of public opinion. See, when it comes to Manny Pacquiao and Amir Khan, amongst his community, he don't feel the pressure. When it comes to Errol Spence, that's where the rivalry comes in. So it has nothing to do with the actual split. It has everything to do with how he's perceived. And he don't want to be perceived as lower than Errol Spence. Although that's not the case, because Errol Spence is just talking business-wise. See, Terence Crawford is speaking from a place of feelings and emotion opposed to facts, okay? He's not dealing with facts, he's dealing with feelings. And so because he's dealing with feelings, that's what's preventing him from saying, I'll take the 60-40. Because, see, Floyd Mayweather, he understood. Business-wise, I take a 60-40, I'm going to be the man after this. I'm going to prove myself and be the man. No, Terence Crawford views himself as the man right now. And because he's considered the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world, and because he was undisputed and 3-division champion, like he said, I'm a Hall of Famer right now. See, all you have to do is listen to his conversation when he says, I never needed Errol Spence. Errol Spence needs me. See, that's about ego. That's not about actual competition. That's not about him thinking that, you know, he could beat Errol Spence or Errol Spence could beat him. It has nothing to do with those. It has everything to do with ego, and it has everything to do with how he's perceived and how Errol Spence is perceived. Terence Crawford don't like the fact that Errol Spence is considered on his level. He accepted the fact that Manny Pacquiao is considered on his level or above. He won't accept that when it comes to Errol Spence Jr. And that's preventing him from taking a 60-40 split. Hopefully Terence Crawford can do business with Al Heyman. He could sit down and negotiate with Al Heyman, and he could understand that he can make up that money on the back end. But if Terence Crawford has an issue with how he's perceived in the public eye by taking a less split than Errol Spence, it'll never get done. Because there's no way Al Heyman as an advisor is going to allow his fighter in Errol Spence to take an even split with a guy where he simply knows that his fight is worth more. Now, maybe Errol Spence and Al Heyman say, you know what? We'll make it up on the back end. Let's just give him 50-50, but then he don't get a share of the pay-per-view number. He give him a 50-50 up front, right? But he don't get a share of the revenue. He don't get a share of the live gate. He don't get a share of the concessions. He don't get a share of the merchandise. He don't get a share. He just get his 50-50. And Errol Spence and Al Heyman say, okay, publicly, we'll take an even split. Because we know what we stand to make on the back end. So maybe that's the case. So let's see how this all unfolds and plays out. But that's all I got for y'all. Make sure you hit the like button. Drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. You haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button. Hit the like button. Hit the bell icon to get all the new notifications. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, all one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shout out to the entire LDBC. Shout out to New Media. Shout out to Black Media Row. Make sure you like and share these videos. That's all I got for y'all. Peace.
This is Amanda, the real deal Serrano, and you're watching Blue Blood Sports TV.